I was invited to my brother's engagement party, but when I showed up, my presence clearly didn't matter. No seat, no name card, no welcome. So I walked out quietly, and by morning, my brother was begging me to stop making him look bad. My name's Jordan. I'm 28, single, and I guess you could say I've always been the black sheep of the family. Not because I ever did anything wrong, but because I never really fit the mold my family expected. I didn't go to med school like my cousin Rachel. I didn't join the family business like my older brother Nathan. I didn't even stay in town. I left, built a quiet life for myself, freelance writing, traveling a bit, and mostly keeping to myself. I never really expected much from them anymore. Not after years of being the afterthought. But I'll be honest, when that invitation came in the mail, thick cream-colored cardstock with my name spelled out in gold, something stirred in me. Nathan was getting engaged to his girlfriend Ashley, and he was having a party to celebrate. For a brief second, I felt like maybe I was included for real, like maybe I was finally being seen. I hadn't heard much from Nathan lately. We texted now and then, mostly short exchanges like, "Happy birthday" or "How's work," but nothing deep. We hadn't had a real conversation in over a year. So when I opened the envelope, saw the elegant script, and realized it was an actual invite, not just some group text or passive mention, I thought maybe things were changing. Maybe this was his way of reaching out. The engagement party was set for a Saturday evening at some fancy vineyard about 30 minutes outside the city. I spent more time than I care to admit choosing what to wear, something nice but not flashy. I went with a dark navy blazer, white shirt, and slacks. Clean, simple. I even bought a gift, had it wrapped at the shop, something for their kitchen registry, a fancy Dutch oven they picked out. It was expensive, but I wanted it to be thoughtful. I wanted to show up and be supportive. When I pulled into the gravel parking lot, the sun was dipping low, casting a warm amber glow over the vines. It felt cinematic. For a moment, I imagined walking in, seeing Nathan's face light up. Maybe him pulling me into a hug and saying, "You came." Maybe Ashley would smile and say, "We're so glad you're here." And maybe, just maybe, I'd sit down at a table and feel like part of a family again. Instead, I barely got through the door before my aunt leaned in, clutching her glass, her voice low and syrupy. "He only invited you out of pity, you know," she whispered, her breath smelling faintly of Chardonnay. "Ashley said they had to, otherwise it would be too obvious." I froze. I was still holding the wrapped gift in both hands. "What?" I asked, thinking I must have misheard. She tilted her head, gave me this look like I was some stray dog who wandered into the wrong yard. "You know how it is," she added with a shrug, like this was just common knowledge. "It's nothing personal. We just didn't think you'd actually show." That hit me harder than I expected. I looked past her into the main room. Round tables with crisp linens, floral centerpieces, strings of golden lights overhead. Everyone was already seated, laughing, clinking glasses, toasting. There were name cards neatly placed in front of each plate. I walked past a few tables, slowly scanning each one. My name wasn't there. I walked the perimeter once, twice. No seat, no card, no one looked up, no one said hi, not even Nathan. I stood there awkwardly by the bar for a minute, holding that wrapped box like a security blanket. I must have looked like a fool, or worse, like someone crashing a wedding they weren't invited to. My chest tightened, and I felt this strange mix of shame and disappointment rising up like a tide. I had told myself not to get my hopes up. I told myself it didn't matter that I was just going out of politeness, but it did matter more than I wanted to admit. I turned around without a word and walked straight out. I didn't even set the gift down. I just carried it back to my car, placed it in the passenger seat like a person, and sat there in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there staring out the windshield at the gravel path ahead. Then I drove home. I didn't post about it, didn't text anyone. I just went quiet. The next morning, someone rang my doorbell at 8:12 a.m. I hadn't even made coffee yet. I opened the door in sweatpants, my hair a mess. And there he was, Nathan, my brother, wearing yesterday's suit minus the tie, looking like he hadn't slept. "You didn't have to make a scene," he said flatly, like I'd burned the place down. I blinked. "A scene? You stormed out. People noticed." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Nathan, there was no seat for me. No one even said hello." He shifted uncomfortably. "You could have just stayed, found a chair somewhere." "I don't know," mingled. "I wasn't supposed to be there, was I?" I asked. "You didn't plan for me." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Look, Ashley handled the seating." "All right." I told her to keep it small. "I didn't think you'd make a big deal out of it." "So I was invited out of pity," I said quietly. "That's what Aunt Linda said." He sighed and rubbed his face. "She talks too much. She wasn't supposed to say that." I stepped back from the door, suddenly very tired. You should go, Jordan. No, really. If this is the part where I'm supposed to apologize for embarrassing you, it's not going to happen. He looked hurt like he hadn't expected that. Like I somehow turned on him instead of the other way around. This is exactly why we don't talk much, he muttered. No, I said, my voice colder than I intended. We don't talk because you only remember I exist when it's convenient. When you want to feel good about inviting the other siblings so no one can say you didn't. He didn't respond, just stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked down the porch steps back to his car. As he pulled away, I looked over at the kitchen table where the engagement gift still sat, still wrapped, still unopened. I didn't even know what to do with it anymore. Give it away, return it, leave it on his doorstep. That moment stayed with me. Not just the whisper from Aunt Linda or the lack of a name card, but that stunned look on Nathan's face when I refused to play along. When I didn't accept my role as the forgotten sibling grateful just to be near the table, even if there was no seat. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Because if I wasn't part of the family, then I didn't owe them anything. And I had something they'd all conveniently forgotten about. Something they were going to need very soon. Let's just say they were going to remember my name whether there was a card or not. For a few days, I went completely quiet. Didn't answer texts, didn't open social media, just disconnected. It wasn't out of spite. It was survival. I needed space to think, to feel, to let the sting fade so I could breathe again without tasting bitterness. But underneath the silence, I was thinking, remembering. See what most of my family didn't know, because they never cared enough to ask, was that for the past 3 years I'd been helping out behind the scenes with something pretty important to all of them. My grandfather's trust. Before he passed, Grandpa Thomas made me one of the trustees on his estate. Quietly, he didn't make a show of it, didn't announce it at a family dinner, or send out a formal notice. He just pulled me aside one day the last time I visited him at his old house in Vermont and said, "You've got a good head and a quiet heart, Jordan. I want you to help make sure the money doesn't ruin the family." At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. I thought he was just rambling about taxes and accounts, but then the paperwork came, the lawyers, the meetings. I learned the ropes, learned that the trust had very clear clauses, very specific stipulations, and most importantly, learned that a large portion of the funds weren't just handed out blindly. They were conditional things like education support, mortgage subsidies, even business loans. Those required approval from the trustees, me, and a firm out of Boston, Nathan's entire business. In fact, his entrepreneurial consulting agency, that he liked to brag about at every family event, had received a sizable loan from that trust 2 years ago. He didn't know I had anything to do with it. Grandpa had asked me not to say said it would be better that way. But now I was starting to think that promise had run its course. A week after the party, I got an email from the firm. A new disbursement request had come in from Nathan, a sizable one. He wanted additional funds to expand operations, including leasing a second office space and hiring a part-time assistant. His request was wordy, filled with business jargon and vague projections. But the part that stuck out, he needed the funds fast, within 2 weeks, or a deal he was chasing would fall through. Normally, I would have passed it along without question, approved it, let the money flow. But now I clicked reply and asked for a meeting. We met at a small cafe downtown Neutral Ground. I chose the place on purpose. It was quiet, public, and not far from his office. Nathan arrived late, still wearing his tailored suit, but his energy was off. He looked tense, checking his watch, tapping the table. "Thanks for meeting," he said quickly, sitting across from me. "I assume this is about the request." I nodded, taking a sip of coffee. "It is." He leaned forward. "So can we move forward? I know the firm usually drags their feet, but this one's time-sensitive." I studied him for a moment. "You didn't know I was a trustee, did you?" His eyebrows pulled together. I've been one of the trustees on Grandpa's estate since he passed. I've seen every request, every report, every loan." He went quiet. His face went pale, then flushed. "Seriously? Seriously?" He exhaled, visibly trying to recalibrate. "Okay, that's unexpected, but fine. Look, you've seen the numbers. It's a good investment." I leaned back in my chair. "It might be. But here's the thing, Nathan. These funds aren't guaranteed. They're based on values Grandpa outlined. Family unity, responsibility, transparency." "Come on, Jordan," he said, irritation creeping in. "Don't make this personal. This is business." "But you made it personal," I replied, voice steady. "At that party, with the way you treated me, with the way your fiancé handled the seating chart, or lack of one, with how you couldn't even look me in the eye that night." He opened his mouth to defend himself, but I cut him off. "And then you show up at my house trying to guilt me, saying I made a scene." "No, I didn't make a scene. I quietly walked away, but I could have." Nathan leaned forward again, tone lower. "So what, this is revenge?" "No," I said calmly. This is accountability. He looked like he wanted to flip the table, but we were in public. And Nathan's image mattered more to him than anything. So he sat back, forced a smile, and said, "Look, I'll talk to Ashley. We'll smooth things over. I'll apologize if that's what you want. That's not what I want." I said, "I want to know that if this trust is going to support you again, you'll treat the people behind it with a little more respect." His jaw clenched. "So you're holding the funds hostage until I play nice. You can call it that. I call it protecting Grandpa's legacy." He stood up, almost knocking over his chair. "You're unbelievable. And you," I said softly, "should be more careful who you treat, like they don't matter." He stormed out. I stayed and finished my coffee. Later that week, I sent the firm a report. Detailed concerns about the request. Questionable expenses unclear. I lack of transparency in prior funding reports. I didn't outright veto it, but I recommended a delay in audit, a deeper review, which meant the funds wouldn't be approved anytime soon. I didn't hear from Nathan for 2 more days. Then one evening I got a call. It was Mom Jordan. She said, her voice sharp. "What are you doing?" I blinked. "Hi, Mom. Nice to hear from you too. Don't play games. Nathan told me you're blocking the trust funds. He needs that money." I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the rain tapping against the glass. "So now you call. You've always been so sensitive," she said, as if that explained everything. "You didn't even give them a chance at the party. You just left. You embarrassed us." "I embarrassed you," I repeated by not sitting at a table that didn't exist for me. "You should have spoken up," she snapped. "Made it work. That's what family does." I laughed, cold and bitter. "No, Mom. What family does is make room. What family does is notice when someone's being excluded. What family does is care. You all made it very clear where I stand." There was silence on the line. Then she said, "So this is payback." "No." I said, "This is me finally setting a boundary. And if you don't like that, maybe ask yourself why." I hung up before she could respond. But I knew that call was just the beginning, because once the money stopped flowing, people who never spoke to me were going to start showing up. And not for the reasons they claimed. It took less than 48 hours. By the end of the week, my phone went from collecting dust to lighting up like it was New Year's Eve. Missed calls, voicemails, texts that started off polite. "Hey, Jordan, can we talk?" Then escalated into passive-aggressive guilt trips. First it was Nathan, then Mom again, then Aunt Linda. Even Cousin Rachel, who hadn't said more than 5 words to me in 3 years, suddenly wanted to grab coffee and catch up. "Yeah, okay." I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded everything to the Boston firm handling the trust and asked them to begin a compliance review. I wanted a paper trail, something formal. I wasn't trying to ruin Nathan. But if he was going to use Grandpa's money, he was going to do it by the book. And I wasn't going to be bullied or sweet-talked out of enforcing that. The trust wasn't some family piggy bank. It was set up to support, not enable. And enabling was exactly what my family had become experts at. Around the time I started hearing whispers from my old hometown, my childhood friend Daniel, who still worked at the local credit union, shot me a message. "Hey, just FY. I heard your brother's expansion got delayed. He's blaming funding issues. You good?" I told him I was fine. Better than fine, actually, because for the first time in years, I wasn't playing the silent background role anymore. I was steering the wheel. A week later, the fallout began. Nathan showed up to my apartment again, but this time I didn't open the door. He knocked once, twice, then a third time. I stood behind the peephole, arms crossed, heart calm. "I know you're in there," he muttered. "Come on, Jordan, don't do this." He paused, then added, "You're going to tank everything over a party." That made me laugh quietly, because he still didn't get it. This wasn't about just the party. It was about years of subtle exclusion. Birthday dinners. I wasn't invited to group family vacations where I found out through Instagram. Conversations I was talked over and jokes made at my expense that no one thought twice about. The party wasn't the beginning. It was the last straw. I watched him from the peephole as he stood there a minute longer, then finally turned and walked off. No voicemail, no apology, just silence. And then came the real surprise. Ashley texted me. I almost didn't recognize the number, but the message was short and polite. "Hi, Jordan. I know things have been tense. Would you be open to meeting just the 2 of us?" I sat with that for a while. I didn't owe her anything, but something about the tone made me curious. It didn't feel fake. It felt tired. We met at a quiet tea shop near my place. She was already seated when I arrived, dressed down in jeans and a sweater, not a trace of the socialite vibe she usually gave off at family events. "I appreciate you coming," she said genuinely. I sat down, keeping my guard up. "What did you want to talk about?" She sighed. "I'm not here to ask you for money or pressure you about the trust. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I blinked. That was unexpected. She looked down at her cup. I didn't handle the party well. I should have made sure you had a seat, a proper one. Not just because Nathan asked me to invite you, but because you deserved it. I didn't say anything. I just listened. I thought you didn't care. She admitted that you were the kind of person who didn't like big events. Nathan always said you were fine being left alone, but seeing you walk out like that, I realized maybe we've all misunderstood you. I tilted my head. So you didn't want me there? She looked ashamed at first. No, but not because of you. Because I didn't know you. And Nathan, well, he talks about you like you're this distant, unpredictable wild card. He made it seem like you'd either not show up or cause drama. I know now that was unfair. I exhaled slowly. I didn't cause drama. I just left. I know, she said softly. And that hurt worse than if you had. That caught me off guard. She continued. You walking out quietly made people start asking questions. Why didn't you stay? Why wasn't there a seat? Why wasn't there a photo of you with Nathan? My parents noticed, even some of our friends. It was a bad look. I folded my arms. So now I'm a PR problem. She shook her head. No, you're a reality check. We sat there in silence for a moment, then she said something I didn't expect. I want to make things right, not to fix the trust, not to fix Nathan, just to fix this. I was quiet, still cautious, still processing. You shouldn't be treated like a second-ass relative, she added, especially when you've been holding more strings than any of us realized. I didn't agree to anything that day, but I thanked her for the honesty, and I left with one thought ringing in my head. Maybe I wasn't the one who needed fixing after all. The next day, Nathan called again. This time I answered. Hey, he said, voice tired, not angry, not smug, just tired. Hey. There was a long pause. Then Ashley said she talked to you. She did. I'm not great at this, he muttered. I know I've messed up a lot. I didn't respond. I've been thinking a lot. He went on about the way I've treated you, the way we all have. I always assumed you were fine on your own, that you didn't want to be included. So I didn't push, didn't invite, didn't think twice. That's convenient, I said. Easier to believe someone doesn't want to be included than to admit you've left them out. He was quiet. I could hear him exhale on the other end. You're right. Another pause. Then I'm not asking you to approve the funds. Not anymore. I just want to talk properly. Maybe grab lunch. Just you and me. No pressure. I didn't answer right away because for the first time he wasn't coming to demand or defend. He was just showing up. And maybe that was a start. But I wasn't going to let my guard down completely. Not yet. Because this was the same brother who left me standing at the edge of his celebration like I was invisible. The same brother who only realized I mattered when the money stopped. And now the real question was, did he care about me or just what I could give him? The next move was mine, and I had one in mind. I didn't say yes to lunch right away. I told Nathan I'd think about it. And I meant it because here's the thing, words are easy. A few sorries, a few we missed UPS, and suddenly everyone thinks the slate is clean. But I wasn't looking for clean. I was looking for real. And real takes time, real takes action. So I waited. A few days passed, then a week, no follow-up calls, no desperate voicemails. It was oddly peaceful. I thought maybe Nathan had given up, accepted my silence as a no. Then one morning I got a letter, not an email, not a text, a physical letter handwritten 3 pages. It was from Nathan. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee and read the whole thing twice. It wasn't perfect. Parts of it felt like he was still trying to justify himself, still trying to rationalize the years of silence of exclusion, but buried in all that there was something genuine. He told me about the pressure he'd felt taking over Dad's role in the family business. How Mom leaned on him and leaned into the idea that he was the good son, the reliable one. How he resented me for having the freedom to walk away from all of it while he stayed behind and did what was expected. He wrote, I told myself you didn't care because that was easier than admitting I did. I looked at you and saw someone brave enough to live on their own terms, and instead of learning from you, I judged you. I made you the outsider because I didn't know how to be anything but the insider. That part stuck with me. He ended the letter by saying, if you never want to speak to me again, I get it. But if there's a small part of you that wants to rebuild something, even if it's slow and awkward, I'm here. I stared at those last 2 words. I'm here. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. So yeah, I agreed to lunch. We met at a small diner we used to go to as kids. He picked it on purpose. I could tell he was already there when I arrived, sipping black coffee, looking nervous. It was a weird full-circle moment sitting across from him in that old vinyl booth, the smell of pancakes and bacon in the air like no time had passed. Except everything had. We talked. Not about the trust, not about the party, not even about the letter, not right away. We talked about stupid things like how weird it was that the diner still had the same jukebox, how Dad still refused to upgrade his phone, how Rachel had recently tried to go viral on TikTok with a video of her dog wearing sunglasses. We laughed. It wasn't forced. It wasn't fake. Eventually, the conversation drifted into deeper water. He asked about my writing, my travel, my last relationship, which had ended a few months ago. I asked about his business, about Ashley, about whether he was actually happy or just checking boxes on some invisible family to-do list. He hesitated, then admitted, I don't know. That more than anything told me he was trying. We talked for 3 hours. At the end of it, we didn't hug. We didn't cry. We didn't make dramatic promises to stay in touch. We just said, let's do this again. And I admit it. But that wasn't the end. There was still the matter of the trust. See, even though Nathan had made an effort, there were still structural issues with his business proposal. The review I'd requested had uncovered some questionable spending. Nothing illegal, but sloppy, unprofessional, and honestly, not the kind of thing Grandpa would have signed off on. The firm called me a few days later. What do you want to do? They asked. And I realized I didn't want to block him. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. So I called Nathan, told him what the auditors found. Told him he had 2 options. He could rework the proposal with full transparency and documentation, or the funds would be denied. I expected him to argue to get defensive. Instead, he said, fair. Then he paused and added, will you help me fix it? That part one hadn't expected. We spent the next few weeks going through everything, meetings, calls, spreadsheets. I showed him how the trust board evaluated proposals, how to frame things, what not to say. It was awkward at first, but slowly something started to shift. We weren't just brothers again. We were teammates. Word got around, of course. Mom found out. At first, she didn't say anything. But then one Sunday afternoon, she texted me out of the blue. Dinner tonight. No explanation, no emoji, just dinner tonight. I stared at it for a good 10 minutes, then replied, why? She answered, because I owe you an apology. I didn't go, not that night, but I didn't block her either because, like I said, real takes time. Ashley and Nathan eventually sent out new wedding invitations. Same couple, same location, but a completely different approach. This time my name was not just included. It was printed first on the list of family members in the inner envelope. There was a handwritten note from Ashley tucked inside. We'd be honored if you came. There's a seat with your name on it, literally. And you know what I went. The wedding was beautiful, classy, thoughtful. And when I arrived, the first person who greeted me was Aunt Linda, but this time she looked mortified. Jordan, she said with a tight smile, so glad you could make it. I smiled back. Didn't think I'd actually show, did you? Her cheeks flushed. Well, of course we hoped. I have a seat this time, right? I asked, walking past her. I found my table 3, close to the dance floor. My name was there, engraved on a thick white card in elegant script. Next to it, a small place card that read, thank you for holding us accountable. Funny how things come full circle. What started as an insult being invited out of pity had turned into something else. I was no longer the forgotten sibling, no longer the outsider, but I didn't need to be the center of attention either. I just needed to be seen. And now I finally was. Not because I made a scene, but because I made a choice. To stop apologizing for existing in the shadows of people who never offered me light. To stop letting guilt dictate my boundaries. To speak up. To walk out when I needed to. And to walk back in on my own terms when I was ready. Because sometimes the quietest exits make the loudest impact.